What's good, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope everybody's having a good week, getting some rest, because we're just a few days away from the legal tampering period of NFL free agency. That begins on Monday. Today, we're going to be taking a look at free agent wide receivers, seeing as this is one of, if not the most glaring need on the Steelers roster right now. So, since I got back from the combine just over the course of the past several days, I've spent basically all of my week, just kind of watching potential targets, looking at guys on the market and trying to see if I can find some of the best fits that, make sense for them. As I'm sure, like most of you guys are aware, this is an underwhelming free agent class overall. I've talked a lot about that. But there are a handful of guys, I think, in this group that definitely makes sense for them specifically. For the purpose of this video, I'm not going to talk a lot about like potential trade targets. I've already wrote about Cooper Kupp weeks and weeks ago when that was first announced. I'm planning on watching DK Metcalf this weekend. If I can, I'm going to try to do an article for Steelers Now just on his scouting report, like what his value will be. But I've really just compiled a list of 6 guys. It was actually 7, but Christian Kirk, who I spent like all day yesterday watching, he just got traded to the Houston Texans for like a 7th round pick. So it'll be the same as the cornerback video that I did. If you haven't watched that, go ahead and check that out. I'll link that at the very end of this video. But I'm just going to go through, give you guys, kind of my scouting reports on each of these players, strengths, weaknesses, and then projected market value. I've got a handful of, starters in this group. Out of those 6 players, there's mostly starters. There's a couple like dart throw kind of depth pieces. But Pittsburgh's depth chart at this position as of right now is George Pickens as the X, but he's entering the final year of his rookie deal. We'll see what happens with that. Calvin Austin, I thought, took a step forward last season as a role player, return guy. Roman Wilson, team's 3rd round pick. He played like a half dozen snaps due to injuries and just falling behind in the offense in general. This is a team that was forced to play Van Jefferson 700 plus snaps last season. So you can tell, like, just by that alone, like how dire this need is. Mike Williams, Ben Skowronek are also free agents. I have interest in bringing Skowronek back as a utility player, but obviously that's kind of like what his role is going to be. Don't really have a ton of interest in bringing Van Jefferson or Mike Williams back, to be completely honest with you. Omar Khan, the front office, everybody in the organization, I mean, they missed out on every single target that they pursued last spring and even leading into the summer. We could talk about the reasons why those things happened, but it's really irrelevant at this point. But obviously that proved to be a huge mistake. It was really detrimental to the things that they wanted to do on offense last season and something that they had to rectify this year for sure. Just as a reminder, there's $60 million in cap space for the Steelers. They still need a quarterback, but there's nothing financially prohibiting them from being aggressive in free agency, and I expect them to come away with a starting caliber wide receiver. Similar to the cornerback market, they, in my opinion, best case scenario for what free agency looks like for the Steelers, they come away with a starter at corner and a starter at receiver, and then you can go into the draft with your options a little bit more open and allow you to kind of get good value across the board and take best player available. Just before we get started, man, just please do me a favor, like that video, subscribe, drop me a comment. I will try to answer as many questions as I get in those. Definitely hit the bell. All that stuff just helps the channel continuously grow, and I really appreciate all of your all's continued support. So I watched well over a dozen guys in some capacity, some more than others, obviously for obvious reasons. But if I don't talk about a specific player, it just could be due to a myriad of different reasons, whether it was the film itself, the fit within the scheme, any of that stuff. But if you have questions on specific guys, I am more than happy to answer those, whether it's on social media, on Twitter, or in the comments on this video. But let's get started. So first guy we're going to talk about, Davante Adams. One of my favorite all-time receivers, one of my favorite all-time prospects. He was in like the 2nd class that I ever evaluated from an NFL draft perspective. I think I've come a long way, but I loved Adams coming out, and he's made me look at least like a somewhat smart evaluator in the process. But yeah, even at 32 years old, man, like this dude's still a baller. Even with dreadful quarterback play over the last several years. Think back to Vegas 2 years ago, working primarily with like Aiden O'Connell, even like Gardner Minshew, a very diminished version of Aaron Rodgers. He still notched over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns last season in just 14 games. So in New York, his role was quite a bit different from like where it was in Green Bay or even in Vegas. He took over 52% of his snaps in the slot. It's a significant increase, but you kind of see the vision on how he could move inside a little bit and maybe prolong his career as he continues to age, a la kind of what Larry Fitzgerald was able to do with the Cardinals many years ago. But still an incredibly detailed route runner. He's mastered the art of kind of changing gears to keep defensive backs on their heels. Still beats press man coverage. I love that about him on a regular basis, whether it's outside, whether it's in the slot, he's still a really difficult cover one-on-one. The superpower for Adams is and always has been the late hands. I think if you ask me, it's really between him and Antonio Brown as far as the best receivers I've ever watched in terms of waiting to the last possible minute to show their hands at the catch point. It just leaves zero room for opponents to make a play on the ball. He makes those over the shoulder catches and back shoulder opportunities look relatively easy. Of course, a lot of that is due to the chemistry that he's had with the quarterbacks that he's played with, mainly like Aaron Rodgers, things like that. But he's a really easy guy to throw to, mainly because he does still have the ability to get a good amount of separation. Like he does still get open. And even when he's covered, like he does have the capacity to make difficult catches and contested catch areas and play up to his size too. So all that you like about him in the red zone, he's always been an incredibly efficient red zone receiver too. The dude he scores a lot of touchdowns. And obviously for an offense like the Steelers, they need to put more points on the board. So getting a player like this that could help them down in the red zone area, I think that's a good thing. In terms of like negatives or just the outlook on Adams in general, he's not quite as explosive or sudden out of his breaks these days as it used to be. I still think he's honestly like probably like 80, 85 maybe percent of what he was at the peak of his powers, which was what, like maybe the best receiver in football. So the Steelers had some interest at the deadline. I definitely think he's still got some really good ball ahead of him. But in the Steelers situation, without a quarterback, they're obviously, not really a contender at this current juncture either. Is that good enough to lure him up north instead of maybe, to pry him away from going back out to the West Coast, like where I feel like there's some reports or some rumblings that he may prefer to go play out there in LA or whatever. I'm seeing some market value stuff at 2 years, $27 million. I think the film from last year shows a much better player than that. I think he can return that value and then some. Really, I think it's going to cost you more than that on a short-term deal. Like I said, I do think that his skill set isn't one that normally like just completely falls off, in my opinion. Like he's just too incredibly smart. He's too detailed. He will be a productive player. I think he's still got some really good years ahead of him. Even if he's not necessarily in his prime, I would expect that the Steelers are going to at least be involved in some capacity. I'm just not actually sure if it'll be enough to like get it done and get him here. But next player to talk about, Chris Godwin. Now that T. Higgins is back in Cincinnati, he's on the franchise tag, and it's the rumors out there that they're telling other teams that he's not available. They're going to end up trading Trey Hendrickson instead. Godwin, 29 years old. He was having a really, really good season, man, in 2024 before getting hurt. ESPN has these like receiver ratings, which I don't necessarily always agree with. I think that they're necessarily gospel, but I do think the high end and low end guys are usually pretty accurate. But it calculates, open score, catch point score, and then yards after the catch. He finished sixth in the NFL last year before he got hurt. Godwin's, a really well-rounded receiver, and that kind of makes him a bit of a shapeshifter because of how many different ways and different roles, different, ways he's been used in an offense throughout his career. He's been successful in every offense he's been in. So that makes him kind of a really good fit for pretty much every team, in my opinion. Really natural hands catcher, could pluck the ball out of the air away from his frame. He's awesome in the middle of the field, doesn't shy away from contact, can play in congested spaces, in congested areas, finds the soft spot in zone. Play strength matches his frame. Ball skills are incredibly underrated, man. Like I honestly didn't even know this until like I started researching for the video itself, but he's converted 59.4% of his contested catch opportunities over an 8-year career. I mean, that's just absolutely insane. Like your best contested catch guys in the league, usually for like PFF's charting, are usually in the high 40s. Like for any given year. Sometimes like contested catch numbers aren't always sticky from year to year, but 59.4%. I mean, it's just that. I mean, that's incredible, man, because you got to think about how large of a sample size that is. Last year, under Liam Cohen, who's now in Jacksonville, I expect that they're probably going to be pretty interested in Godwin as well. They used him as this like kind of underneath yak option. You saw his average depth of target come down, but he really excelled there too. So it's like he can do pretty much everything, whatever you need him to do. 6.3 yards per catch after the reception. That was 7th among NFL receivers with 50 plus targets. Just a consummate professional, really effective run blocker with good size, pretty good technique as well. Something that makes him stand out among this class. He's probably like the belle of the ball, like I said. He's going to be the highest paid player, I think, out of this group. This isn't necessarily the first time that Godwin suffered a really serious injury heading into free agency. Unfortunately, he did dislocate his ankle, I believe, last season, week 7 or 8, if I remember correctly, in a blowout loss to Baltimore. He also tore his ACL in 2021, which I believe was also his contract year. The good news is he's shown that he has the ability, excuse me, to bounce back from injury and then still play at a relatively high level pretty quickly. I think is, the injury history itself can be a concern for sure because he's gotten unlucky in some spots, but I do think that he has shown that he's got the character and the work ethic to get himself back to top tier shape and all that stuff. I'm seeing projections around 3 years, like 20 million per season, 22 million per season. I mean, he's beloved in the Tampa community. Every Bucs fan, every Bucs person I've ever talked to has said that he's a great leader in the locker room. So he could literally be brought back to Tampa before this video even publishes, and it'll be like a Christian Kirk situation, which is where like I wasted all this time watching him. But I do think you're going to need a pretty strong offer to lure him away from the Bucs. But Godwin may not have that like singular elite trait or physical trait, I would say, that sets him apart like a lot of the other like true wide receiver ones, the real difference makers do in the NFL level. But he's just a jack of all trades, man, and a really good football player. I really wish he was healthy because I would be willing to make a pretty splash signing because I do think he's a great scheme fit. And he is somebody that I would really want on my side every Sunday going into battle. So next player we're going to talk about, someone that we've talked about before on this channel, both in the scouting report phase and during like the NFL trade deadline. Darius Slayton from the New York Giants, 28 years old, truly a fascinating case study because I'm not sure that like any wide receiver, and I'm not even trying to be like hyperbolic about this, I'm not sure if any wide receiver in the NFL has been hurt more by their quarterback play over the last several seasons. This is what happens when you pair a long striding gazelle with true like legit 4.4 speed, can reach the top speed in the blink of an eye with one of the worst deep ball throwers in the NFL, Daniel Jones. So that's just pretty much like what his film looks like. He can regularly stack corners. He's got the juice to run away from guys to create explosive plays. He's averaged over 15 yards per reception throughout his career. Again, despite a quarterback that's literally incapable of pushing the ball down the field. You just look at the past 2 seasons, per Sports Info Solutions, 31% of his deep targets were deemed uncatchable. It's pretty bad, guys. And then even then, like going and actually looking at those plays individually, there's plenty of examples of the ball being catchable, but not necessarily where it should be thrown, forcing him to make difficult adjustments. And then there's plenty of more reps on film of just like him running routes and he's like wide open. He's either not part of the progression or Jones just missed him or whatever. But there's actually more to his game than just running in a straight line. And I think that that's important to point out just because he does have that reputation as a speed guy. And I do think obviously that is valid. That is his game. But he's actually played on the ball quite a bit. Like he's got real X receiver reps. He's got good footwork. He's got a quality release package versus press. He loves the diamond release and outside to get the corner to turn their hips. And then he'll break back inside on slant routes. He's pretty dangerous on those. His explosiveness kind of carries in to the ball carrier phase when the quarterback is able to actually hit him in stride, which was not always the case. Another thing that I noticed was that he has a really good feel for like oncoming defenders when he's running like curl routes and everything, and pretty good balance to stay on his feet and kind of turn upfield and get additional yards, shake free after the catch. Sometimes when the Steelers do sign free agents, it's guys that have played well against them in the past. I always think of like Dante Moncrief in this regard, where like Moncrief's like all of his best games in his career, I think came against Pittsburgh before he signed there. Hopefully this hypothetical signing would go better for them. But in 2 games versus Pittsburgh throughout his career, Slayton has 210 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, he torched them last year in primetime. I was there live in person to see that. The negatives for Slayton really just all revolve around his hands, which legitimately are not good. I'm just going to be completely blunt and honest. He's a habitual body catcher who often looks like he's trying to catch a beach ball. He has a career 11% drop rate. It's really poor for a guy with this much playing time. The leaping ability doesn't actually show up at the catch point the way that you wish it would. Spotrac has him projected at 3 years around 15 million per season. His skill set is valuable for sure because of what he can do against single high. He's going to force you to shade his side. And if not, he's probably going to run by whoever's covering him. One thing about that though is like you're betting on him being a more productive pro in a better environment than what we've seen so far. I mean, you just go look at his numbers. The Giants, I think, had a 4th round pick that they were seeking at the trade deadline this year, elected to keep him. And like he did nothing down the stretch. He was a complete non-factor. Of course, they ended up moving on from Daniel Jones. The quarterback situation after that point was actually worse. So, I mean, I don't really care a ton about the actual production down the stretch last season, given the ecosystem in which he was operating with them. But it's just, there's going to have to be a significant step up in order for you to get good return on investment with that type of contract. But one cool thing about Slayton that I saw like while researching is like everything I've heard, read, anything is that he's a great teammate. Malik Neighbors actually credited him with aiding his success last year. He said that Slayton was actually creating cool cut-ups for the receiver room, kind of detailing opposing quarterbacks' tendencies and everything like that. So I thought that was pretty cool. Pittsburgh, I think, could use an adult in the room, in the receiver room. So I think that would be nice. Kind of moving on to a different player that I do like, probably won't command as much money on the market, but Josh Palmer from the Chargers. He's going to be 26 years old this year. Like I said, I watched over a dozen receivers to make this video. I was pretty deep down a rabbit hole to try to find potential fits that made sense. And I have to admit, man, like I kind of like Josh Palmer, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. I am surprised to be saying that, but I had fun watching this film, man. He's got good size. He's 6'1", 210 pounds. I felt like he kind of fits the Arthur Smith mold of guys that he typically gravitates towards in the past. 28 of his 39 receptions this past year went for a first down, so he did move the chains a lot for them. One of the games that actually impressed me was back in 2023 when he went up against Trent McDuffie, who I think is legitimately one of the better cornerbacks in the league. He gave him some real problems in that one. He caught a slot fade on him. He actually beat him on a whip return route. He's a strong dude, crafty route runner. He uses deception to get open. It's kind of weird because him and Herbert were really good on timing routes and outside of structure on the first 2 levels of the field, especially in the intermediate area. But he did miss him a couple times on shot plays down the field. So it's not like he's limited in that regard. Like he can get over the top despite not being necessarily a speedster by any stretch of the imagination. But they just weren't in sync in that regard. So I've kind of seen him in that like $4 to $7 million per season range on a multi-year contract. I think that's really nice value for this type of player who has alignment versatility. He's lined up in the slot. He could play outside. He has proven that like he can get open versus press. He's not a great athlete overall, like I said, and he has been given a lot of reps in LA to kind of seize a larger role, but wasn't ever to kind of take a significant step forward. So as far as like upside, I'm not really sure like how much better he's going to get, but I do think that he is like already kind of a solid wide receiver 3, potentially even somebody that could moonlight as a wide receiver 2 while you kind of incorporate a first or second round wide receiver to the starting lineup. It should be notable that the wide receiver draft class isn't what it was the prior seasons either. So there's not a ton of options, but this is a guy who kind of like when the Steelers got past free agency last year and we said like, okay, they're just going to get Van Jefferson and like maybe they draft somebody to kind of eventually step into that role. That actually didn't happen, but like unlike Jefferson, like he can actually play. Like he's not going to be a detriment to your offense, even if he's not necessarily going to be a difference maker either. So next wide receiver we're going to talk about, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Speaking of our Arthur Smith style receivers with good size, how about Westbrook-Ikhine, who played underneath him in Tennessee, was an undrafted free agent, I think back in like 2019, 2020 maybe. His hard-nosed mentality was something that earned him playing time, even as an undrafted rookie. I remember when the Steelers hired Arthur Smith, and I was going back to try to find some clinic stuff. I found one of Arthur Smith, and he was actually praising Westbrook-Ikhine, saying that like he just wanted to get him on the field because he just loved the dude's demeanor. He's 28 years old now. He's an ascending player who's coming off his best season as a pro by far. He had 9 touchdowns on just 32 catches. Now, that rate is unsustainable, obviously, but this dude did do some good things for that offense. He actually had a pretty good rapport with Mason Rudolph, former Steelers quarterback last year. He's physical. He uses his hands well to keep guys off his frame. He's a smooth mover for his size. Honestly, despite just like kind of adequate build up speed, he has the frame to box guys out at the catch point. He flashed the ability last year to make catches in traffic and box guys out, but the contested catch numbers, when I actually went and looked at them, they were abysmal up until this past season. So I'm curious if like that's actually sustainable. Were there improvements in that regard? So I am curious about like what changed year over year that led to this success last season, but I'm not curious enough to go find out unless the Steelers actually sign him. So I already spent a lot of time on this project. Wasn't willing to dive into previous seasons of Westbrook Akine, but he is a willing and capable blocker. I'm seeing 2 years, like 8 million, something like that. That's pretty much pennies on the dollar, man. Like he's a niche role player with a wide receiver 3 type of ceiling, in my opinion, in the right system. And he does fit this system, but he also helps you on special teams as well. He's got almost 600 career snaps on all 4 phases. So once you get past your top like 2 or 3 guys in the receiver room, like those guys do normally have to contribute in some form or fashion on special teams. I have no idea how you could look at him and not think that he could do that. He's already proven that ability. So I do like the fit as far as somebody, if, I don't think it definitely can't be same with Palmer, same with this next guy we're talking about. It can't be the only addition that they make, but it is something that could provide some type of value. You get good return on investment. So we know the Steelers were interested in Darius Slayton to a degree last trade deadline. They made some calls. But in the event that they do get outbid for his services in free agency, which I think could potentially happen depending on what the market actually looks like, who's still available when free agency opens on Monday, because I have heard that he has some fans around the league for sure is what I heard in Indy. I do have a fallback option, and it is Commanders wide receiver Dyami Brown. Similar production to Slayton last season, and they share many of the same characteristics as players. They kind of have similar builds as well. Coming out of UNC, I think the book on Brown was that he was this field stretcher, but he really did basically nothing over the first like 3 years of his career. I think he was a day 2 pick, I know, coming out, I think, of the 2021 draft. The Steelers, I'm pretty sure, probably got a good look on Brown when they were scouting Sam Howell when he was coming out of the draft, because he was there the year prior. So I'm sure that they looked at him in some capacity. But they did. His play this past season took a step up. I think that does coincide with Jayden Daniels getting better quarterback play in the room, and also just a better fit in Cliff Kingsbury's offense. There were a couple deep balls that he caught last year. He ran past Martin Emerson of the Browns on the deep ball. He also ran past Darius Slay on a deep ball. Not that those guys are speedsters, but he does have the ability to stretch the field, similar to what Slayton can give you, just a less proven version of that. But Washington's offense, if you've watched it, it's very RPO, college-y, a lot of screens. And Brown was actually really good after the catch, which was surprising to me because that just was not the player that I ever envisioned him being coming out of college. Just didn't think that was in the cards. 7.3 yards per catch after reception. I think that was 5th in the NFL. So really good numbers there. He's got good acceleration. He shows good decisiveness and contact balance as a runner. He's a little bit more physical. He's got some wiry strength to him at the top of the route. Wasn't getting like completely bullied either. So I do think that Brown is a guy that's worth a dart throw in the cup if the first like couple of days of free agency like don't go their way. So like I said, if they do get outbid for a guy like Darius Slayton and the options are drying up, and they're not willing to pay the draft capital or the trade capital to go get some of these other big name free agents, again, just reiterate that like I'm not saying go sign Dyami Brown. He's going to be their wide receiver 2 for next season, but I do think as a role player, like he is still on the ascension and would be somebody that, I think about all the different times that they tried to throw those little plays to the flat or little screens to like Calvin Austin. That's just not really his game. So I think having a guy like Brown to create some hidden yardage and an offense that could kind of use some more easy buttons, regardless of who the quarterback is, I do think that makes a good bit of sense. So I know that's a lot of information. I really appreciate your all's continued support. I really enjoyed doing this project. I'm trying to get some more Steelers content uploaded before free agency. We'll see how much I'm able to actually get up to you guys, but my game plan is to have at least 1, maybe 2 more videos. I would like to do a video on like just some random players that I found in the free agency pool that I think makes sense. Obviously, the wide receiver and cornerback market, I think they need starters, but I'm more so like talking about other dart throws at random positions that I think could be interesting fits, because like kind of like what we saw last year with Sean Elliott, like Granted, he was mostly a starter for them and played a hefty amount of snaps, but you can get good value on some of these guys that, are cheaper in the third and fourth tier free agency instead of spending big. So I may, depending on how much time I've got, I may try to do a quick video on just some quick hitters, maybe not full scouting reports or anything like that. Quick hitters of guys that may interest me. You guys let me know if that interests you. As always, on your way out, please make sure that you like the video, subscribe, drop me a comment. Let me know what y'all thought of the video of these players, any type of questions that you guys got, and I will check you guys very soon. Peace and love.